In the Muffin Reads series, I intend to take you on journeys into myths, legends, and other fascinating stories from the past in a bite-sized, easy-to-digest and complicated way. Some of these stories you may recognise from the telly or movies, but don't worry, we won't need tens of hours to tell them, and only special effects needed are those of your own imagination. The first Muffin Reads I've selected, and feel free to suggest future reads, is the Saga of the Volsungs. This is an influential tale, actually a series of connected tales, that has fed into the works of Wagner, Tolkien, and many more. If you have jumped into this episode first, please wind back and pick up part 1, link in the description, then jump back to continue this fascinating tale. When we last left our story, Sigmund, son of King Volsung, R.I.P., had broken free from the stocks of King Saga. He was now free, but stuck within the woods of Gotland. Meanwhile, his twin sister Signy remained the wife of Saga, who was responsible for the deaths of their father and all 9 of their brothers. Of the Volsungs, only Sigmund and Signy remained. Signy sent her loyal men into the woods on the morning following Sigmund's escape to see what had happened. They reported to her that Sigmund had escaped and was hiding in the woods. She went to him and helped him build an underground home. She brought provisions to him when he needed them, and so he stayed hidden in the woods for some time. For his part, Saga believed that all of the sons of the Volsungs were dead. Now, Signy had 2 sons by King Saga, and she thought to test them. She brought her eldest son to her, and sewed his shirt cuffs to his skin, whereon he cried out in pain. Then she sent him to Sigmund as a companion, and to see if the blood of her father had risen in him. This she did, and Sigmund gave the boy a sack of flour with which to make bread while he went out to collect firewood. When Sigmund returned, the boy had done nothing with the flour. When asked why, he replied, "I did not dare touch the sack, as it looked as if something was alive in there." Sigmund related this to his sister when they next met, and she saw that her first son had failed her test. She said to Sigmund, "Take the boy and kill him. He shows no courage, so need not live any longer." And this Sigmund did. In due course, Signy sent the younger of the 2 sons to Sigmund for the same purpose, and after sewing his shirt cuffs to his skin, at which he, like his brother, cried in pain, again Sigmund gave the boy flour to make bread, and again the boy failed on fear that there was something alive in the sack, and again Signy bade Sigmund to kill her son, which he did. In this way did Signy test her sons with Saga and take revenge upon him by having his heirs slain. In time, a sorceress came to Signy and added if they could exchange shapes. Signy agreed to this, and so the sorceress took her form and posed in her position within Saga's court. Signy, now in the shape of the sorceress, left the court and went to her brother in the forest. Not knowing it was Signy, Sigmund invited her to eat with him, and, finding her attractive, asked if she would stay the night with him. She did so, and the next 2 nights too, after which she returned home. Meeting the sorceress there, the 2 agreed to exchange shapes once more, assuming their own forms. Eventually, Signy gave birth to a son, and called him Sinfjotli. He was strong and resembled Volsung in size and appearance. Signy decided to test Sinfjotli in the same way that she had tested her previous sons. She sewed his cuffs to his skin, but he did not cry out. She ripped the stitches from him, and again, he did not show any indication of pain. "Surely that must have caused you pain," she said to Sinfjotli, to which he replied, "It was no real pain to a Volsung." She then sent him to Sigmund, who gave him the sack of flour and went off to gather firewood. When he returned, he found that Sinfjotli had taken the flour from the sack and kneaded it into bread dough. "Did you not find anything in the flour?" Sigmund asked. "I thought that there was something alive in there," he replied. "But whatever it was, I've kneaded it in." Sigmund then told Sinfjotli that the flower had hidden highly venomous snakes. They discarded the dough. For while Sigmund was so strong as to be immune to venom, Sinfjotli could only tolerate poison on his skin and could not eat or drink it. Sinfjotli stayed with Sigmund, and they spent much time as bandits and bounty hunters, relieving the men of King Sigurd's lands of their coin. Sinfjotli grew strong, but knowing Sigmund's story kept urging Sigmund to take vengeance on Sigurd. Sigmund, believing Sinfjotli to be Sigurd's son, put this down to inheritance of the king's evil mindset, that he should put so little stock on his kingship, even though, or so he thought, the boy's kin was his enemy. Once they came upon a house, inside which were 2 sleeping men adorned with gold rings. Above them were 2 wolfskins. These men were sons of kings, and had been cursed so that they were trapped in the skins as wolves for 9 days out of every 10. Sigmund and Sinfjotli had discovered them on this 10th day. Trying on the skins, the 2 found that they could not remove them, and they took on wolf form. They agreed to live as wolves for the experience, but to howl if in danger, and they supposed that they could each take on 7 men at once, with any more being a danger, so that the other might come to help. Sigmund urged Sinfjotli to remember this agreement, as he feared that the daring of his youth would tempt men to hunt him down. In time, Sigmund found himself facing 7 men, and howled. Sinfjotli heard, and came to his aid, and killed all 7. Later, Sinfjotli found himself hunted by 11 men, and after a fierce fight, killed them all. He did not howl, and he was grievously wounded. Sigmund found him under an oak tree. "Why didn't you howl for help?" Sigmund asked. "Because you asked for help against 7 men, but I didn't want to call for your help against these 11. I am but a child in age to you, but I am stronger." So they argued, and Sigmund, in anger, bit Sinfjotli's throat, nearly killing him. Sigmund brought Sinfjotli back to the house, and laid him on the bed there. They still could not leave the wolfskins, and he did not know how to heal the wounds that he had inflicted. One day, while out in the forest, he saw 2 weasels fighting. One bit the other's neck, and while it lay dying, brought a leaf to it. The weasel passed the leaf over the injury, at which point the dying weasel jumped up, unwounded and alive. Sigmund sought out such a leaf, and was brought one by a raven. Returning to Sinfjotli, he passed the leaf over the wound, and Sinfjotli was healed. They then returned to Sigmund's underground home, and remained there until they could remove their skins. When they could discard them, they burned them, destroying the curse. During that time, while wearing the skins, and after they had removed them, Sigmund and Sinfjotli performed many deeds in King Sigurd's country, and soon Sinfjotli was grown. It is at this point that Sigmund wished to visit his vengeance upon King Sigurd. And so the 2 travelled to the court of Sigurd. When they entered, they were seen by the 2 new young sons of Signy and Sigurd, who fled to their father to tell him that they had seen strange armoured and armed men. While Sigurd contemplated treachery and gathered men for the oncoming battle, Signy took her sons to the room where Sigmund and Sinfjotli had come. "The king knows that you are coming, and these children have betrayed you. You must kill them," she told them. Sigmund refused to slay the children, but Sinfjotli did not hold back, murdering them where they stood. And so Sigmund and Sinfjotli entered Sigurd's court, and a great fight ensued. But because the king had been warned, he had had time to prepare. Sigmund and Sinfjotli were overpowered and bound and left, while Sigurd contemplated their fate. In the morning, Sigurd had a cairn constructed. He divided the cairn into 2 chambers, with a huge slab set upright in the centre of the cairn, and so large as to completely isolate the 2 halves of the cairn from each other. In these 2 chambers he placed Sigmund and Sinfjotli. He thought it a fine torture that the 2 be buried alive, being able to hear each other starving and dying without able to see or touch. As the cairn was being laid over with turf, Signy secretly threw a bundle of straw into Sinfjotli's chamber, and then the cairn was completely sealed shut. In the darkness, Sinfjotli felt Signy's straw. "Well, I won't starve. My mother has provided pork hidden in this straw," he spoke to Sigmund through the slab. But feeling around more, he came upon another object, stabbed through the pork. "It's your sword! Signy has hidden your sword in the pork. I can feel its hilt." The very sword that Sigmund had drawn from Barnstock. Sinfjotli pierced the slab with Sigmund's sword, and it went through the stone. Sigmund then grasped the point, and together they drew the sword back and forth as a saw, cutting through the slab until it was broken into two. They then used the sword to cut through the stone of the cairn, freeing themselves. Once they had made their escape, they returned to Sigurd's court. Finding the court asleep, they gathered as much wood as they could find and placed it in and around the hall. Then they set fire to it. As the hall burned, Sigmund called out to his sister for her to receive his honour in helping avenge their father. Signy came to him and told him of her sorrows, of her marriage to Sigurd against her will, of the testing and the deaths of her first two sons, of all she had done to punish Sigurd. She even told Sigmund of the sorceress, and how that they had lain together, and how Sinfjotli was actually their son, not the son of Sigurd. With that, she kissed Sigmund, her brother, and Sinfjotli, her son, and then walked back into the fire. There her sorrow finally ended, and she died with King Sigurd and all of his retainers. Sigmund and Sinfjotli gathered men and returned to the kingdom of the Volsung. There they found another king had taken over the realm, and they duly defeated him. Sigmund became the king of the Volsungs and took a bride, Borghild. By her he had two sons, Helgi and Hamund. Helgi grew to be well loved and accomplished, and he and Sinfjotli commanded the armies of the famed King Sigmund. A couple of things left to tie up in this arc. Helgi, as mentioned before, proved himself to be very accomplished. One of his most noteworthy feats was in defeating the powerful king Hunding, and following him, his sons that had come seeking revenge. Following these battles, Helgi found himself attracted to a woman that he had come across, riding near a forest with a group in rich attire. She was Sigrun, daughter of King Hogni. Now Hogni had promised Sigrun to Hodbrod, son of King Granmar. Sigrun told Helgi that while he would rather follow him home and become his wife, she could not because of this promise, unless Hodbrod could be defeated. And so Helgi raised a mighty army and headed for the lands ruled by Hodbrod and Granmar. And so it was that they reached Granmar, and Sinfjotli came forward to exchange insults with Granmar. After this exchange, Granmar rode to Hodbrod to tell him of Helgi's great army and his intent. So Hodbrod sent out a call to his kingdom and allies and gathered a great and heroic army for himself. At Frekkenstein, the two armies met. Sigrun and her shield maidens joined the battle with Helgi. After a fierce and brutal battle, Helgi slew Hodbrod under his standard, and thereby winning Sigrun for himself. Not only that, but the lands of Granmar and Hodbrod were forfeit to Helgi, and his fame and his power swelled as a result. And it is there that we leave the story of Helgi, who ruled as a great and powerful king for a long time thereafter. The final loose end concerns Sinfjotli's fate. Sinfjotli fell for a woman, and unfortunately this same woman was also the love interest of Borghild's brother. If you remember, Borghild was the wife taken by Sigmund on his return from King Sigurd's realm. They contested and battled for her, and in the end, Sinfjotli killed the queen's brother. In grief and anger, Borghild asked Sinfjotli to leave the kingdom, for she didn't want to set eyes on the killer of her brother. Sigmund refused to let Sinfjotli go, but offered instead compensation to the queen, even though he had never done so for the life of a man before. Borghild then set about preparing her brother's funeral feast. Many nobles were invited, and she set herself the task of serving drink throughout the banquet. When she came to fill Sinfjotli's cup, he noticed that the ale was fouled. "Give it to me, then," said Sigmund, and he drained the cup. Borghild came to Sinfjotli again with a second cup. He again noticed that something was wrong with the ale, and again Sigmund took his cup and drained it instead. When Borghild came to Sinfjotli a third time, Sigmund was quite drunk. She taunted Sinfjotli for his lack of bravery, for letting someone else drink for him. When he took his cup, he saw again that it was poisoned. Sigmund this time said to Sinfjotli, "Well, filter the poison through your moustache as you drink." So Sinfjotli tried to do so. But still some of the poison entered him, and if you remember, Sinfjotli was vulnerable to venom coming into him, and so it was that he died. The stricken Sigmund took his friend and son's body to a fjord, where a man waited in a small boat. The man asked Sigmund if he wanted passage across the ford, and the king said he did. But the boat was too small for all of them, so Sinfjotli's body was taken first. But when the man, the boat, and Sinfjotli's body reached the middle of the fjord, they vanished and were never seen again. Sigmund returned to his halls and drove Borghild from them. She died shortly after that, but King Sigmund a while longer, gaining fame as the greatest champion and king of those times. I hope you enjoyed this second episode of the Saga of the Volsungs. In the next episode, we'll discover the final fate of Sigmund and meet the greatest hero of this saga, Sigurd. Remember to subscribe and turn notifications on to be informed when this episode goes up, and check out the rest of my channel's content for something else that might catch your eye. Until next time.